There's a 600-year-old book, handwritten in a script that no living person can read. It has illustrations of plants that don't appear to exist. It has maps that don't match anywhere on Earth. The codebreakers who cracked the Enigma machine tried to read this book. The people who broke the Japanese purple cipher, the ones who literally won the Second World War with cryptanalysis, they tried too. They all failed. After 600 years of effort, we cannot understand a single word of it. It's called the Voynich Manuscript. In 1921, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania announced he'd cracked the manuscript. His name was William Romain Newbold, and what he claimed to have found was extraordinary. According to Newbold, the visible script was a decoy. The real message was hidden in microscopic shorthand strokes within each letter. You needed a magnifying glass to even see them. When he decoded those hidden strokes, what he claimed to have found was unbelievable. He saw passages that described Roger Bacon, a 13th century friar, observing biological cells under a compound microscope and seeing spiral galaxies through a telescope, 400 years before either of these instruments was invented. Now, if true, it would have rewritten the history of science. It made international headlines. People were stunned, and then it all fell apart. A researcher at the University of Chicago named John Matthews Manley took a closer look and realised that Newbold's microscopic shorthand was just ink cracking on rough parchment. His method was so flexible you could use it to produce literally any text you wanted. Newbold had spent years decoding patterns that just weren't there. But Manley did leave us something. He coined the nickname that stuck ever since: the most mysterious manuscript in the world. Okay, so Newbold was an academic, not a cryptographer. But what if you threw actual military codebreakers at it? People whose literal job was breaking codes that were designed to be unbreakable. They did. Herbert Yardley, chief of the US government's first cryptanalytic bureau, tried. He couldn't crack it. William Friedman, arguably the greatest American cryptanalyst of the 20th century, he was the man who broke the Japanese purple cipher. He formed a study group in 1944 to work on the Voynich, and he went back to it again in the 1960s. He never published a solution. His private conclusion: it might not be a cipher at all. It might be an entirely invented language. His wife Elizabeth was a formidable codebreaker in her own right. She'd broken rum runner ciphers during Prohibition and cracked Nazi spy rings in South America during the Second World War. She studied the Voynich independently. Same result, nothing. John Tiltman, Bletchley Park codebreaker, working for NSA and GCHQ, he spent years on it. His 1967 paper concluded it was unlike any cipher system documented before the 20th century. Then, in the 1970s, a US Navy cryptographer named Prescott Currier discovered something nobody could explain. The manuscript has two statistical dialects. He called them language A and language B. There was different word patterns, different character frequencies, and they correspond with different handwriting, as if two different people were writing in two different versions of the same unknown system. Just to be clear about what we're dealing with here, the people who won wars by breaking codes, people who cracked systems that were specifically engineered to be unbreakable, they all tried to read this book, and the book won every single time. So what is this thing? Let me show you. The Voynich Manuscript is about the size of a paperback, 234 surviving pages written on vellum, that's calfskin. from at least 14 or 15 animals. Radiocarbon dating puts it between 1404 and 1438, the dawn of the Italian Renaissance. The script is written in what researchers call Voyniches, about 170,000 individual characters in an alphabet of somewhere between 20 and 30 letters. And there's at least 5 distinct scribal hands. This wasn't one person's diary, multiple people worked on this. It includes multi-page foldouts. The most famous spans 6 pages when fully opened. It's a map-like diagram of 9 connected circular islands with castles and causeways. A map of what? Nobody knows. The book is divided into 6 sections, and honestly, some of them are properly strange. First, there's the herbal section. That's about 126 pages of plant illustrations. It looks like a medieval book of plants, except none of the 113 plants can be identified. Some look like composites, bits of real plants fused together into things that don't exist. Then the astronomical section. Zodiac roundels, nude figures holding stars. There's a Sagittarius archer wearing a distinctly Florentine hat. The castle illustrations show swallowtail Ghibelline merlins, and that's a strong pointer to northern Italy. Then, and this is the one that always gets people, the balneological section. Naked women bathing in green pools connected by elaborate pipe networks. Recent scholarship suggests that this might depict medieval understandings of conception and reproductive health, but really, your guess is as good as mine. There's also a pharmaceutical section, plant parts next to ornate apothecary jars, like a working pharmacopoeia. In a recipe section, dense text with almost no illustrations, laid out exactly like medieval recipe collections. Okay, but here's where it gets properly weird. If you run the statistics on Voyniches, word frequency, how vocabulary clusters by topic, whether words seem to have prefixes or suffixes, it behaves exactly like a real language. Different sections use different words, the way a real book would talk about different subjects. The word frequency distribution follows something called Zipf's law, which is a hallmark of natural language. But, and this is the part that breaks people's brains, when you zoom in to the character level, the entropy is way too low. It's about 2 bits per character, where natural languages, they sit at 3 to 4. The characters are too predictable. You get the same words appearing 3-4 times in a row, something no natural language does in writing. So from a distance it looks like a language, but up close it falls apart. And that paradox is at the heart of everything that follows. And it's why after 6 centuries, nobody can actually agree on what this thing actually is. But before we get into the theories, and there's some wild ones, there's another mystery. Where did this book come from? Because the trail of ownership reads like a spy novel. In 1912, a Polish-American antique bookseller named Wilfred Voynich bought a batch of manuscripts from a secret Jesuit sale in Italy. The conventional story says that this was at Villa Mondragone near Rome, but recent archival research points to Villa Torlonaia in Castel Gandolfo. The Jesuits, they were selling secretly because they feared confiscation by the Italian state. Among the manuscripts, Voynich found what he called an ugly duckling, a book unlike anything he'd seen in decades of dealing. And tucked inside it was something that made his pulse race. It was a letter, dated the 19th of August 1665. It was written by Johannes Marcus Marci, a rector of Charles University in Prague, and also the personal physician to 2 Holy Roman emperors. The letter was addressed to Athanasius Kircher, the celebrated Jesuit polymath. Now the letter says that this book once belonged to Emperor Rudolf II of the Holy Roman Empire. He paid 600 gold ducats for it. That's about 2.1 kilograms of gold. Now it also said that the author was believed to be Roger Bacon, the 13th century English friar. Voynich, he latched onto that. He spent the rest of his life promoting it as a lost work of Bacon. He was wrong. Bacon died in 1292, more than a century before the manuscript was even made. But that belief shaped the manuscript's early reputation, and it drew the first wave of serious attention to it. Marcy's letter contains one line that's haunted researchers ever since. Such sphinxes as these obey no one but their master. He sent the book to Kircher hoping he could decode it. Kircher, the man who had falsely claimed to have deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs, almost certainly tried, and he certainly failed. So let's trace the chain. Kircher gets it from Marcy. Marcy got it from George Baresch, a Prague alchemist who complained that the manuscript was taking up space uselessly in his library. Before Baresch, it belonged to Jakub Horchetsky Tepenets, Rudolf II's imperial distiller. His name is actually visible faintly on the first page, but only under ultraviolet light. Before Tepenets, Rudolf II, and before Rudolf, well, this is where it gets speculative. The English magus John Dee lived in Bohemia in the 1580s, and his son later on mentioned that his father owned a book containing nothing but hieroglyphics. And in October 1586, Dee wrote in his diary that he had 630 ducats, and that's suspiciously close to the 600 Rudolf supposedly paid. Did Dee sell the manuscript to the emperor? It's suggestive, but unproven. And before Dee, nothing. The manuscript was made sometime between 1404 and 1438. So that leaves roughly 150 years from creation to the first time anyone might have mentioned owning it. That's completely unaccounted for. Whoever made this book and why, that's a question that no one can answer. After Voynich, the book passed through to his wife Ethel, a novelist, and the daughter of George Boole, the mathematician whose logic would one day power every computer on Earth. Even that family connection couldn't help. Then it went to her companion Anne Nill, and then to dealer Hans P. Krause, who eventually donated it to Yale's Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library in 1969. It's been there ever since. You can view every single page online right now for free, but nobody can read a word of it. Now you might be thinking, okay, the 20th century codebreakers couldn't crack it, but they didn't have computers, they didn't have AI, they didn't have machine learning trained on hundreds of languages. Surely someone's figured it out by now. Yeah, about that. In 2018, researchers Kondrack and Hauer fed the Voynich manuscript into an algorithm trained on 380 languages. Its best guess, Hebrew, with the vowels stripped out and the words alphabetically rearranged. Over 80% of the decoded words appeared in a Hebrew dictionary. Sounds promising, right? They ran it through Google Translate, gibberish. A native Hebrew speaker judged it completely incoherent. The authors themselves admitted that the result might just be a side effect of how the algorithm works, not an actual translation. And this is something worth understanding about AI. It will always give you an answer. It doesn't have a none of the above option. If you train an algorithm on 380 languages and ask it which one fits best, it'll pick one, even if the answer is none of them. It's how these systems work. They're pattern matching machines, and sometimes the pattern they find isn't real. In 2019, a researcher named Gerard Cheshire announced that he'd solved the manuscript in 2 weeks. a proto-Romance language, he said, and the University of Bristol put out a press release. Within 24 hours, linguists and medievalists piled in with corrections, and the university retracted it. Proto-Romance isn't an actual language. His method was so loose, it could produce any reading that you wanted. Every few years, someone announces they've cracked the Voynich, and every few years, the Voynich community, this incredible global network of historians, cryptographers, linguists, and obsessives, tears the claim apart. The manuscript remains unread. So what are we left with? After 6 centuries of failed attempts, there are 4 theories that serious researchers still take seriously. I'm going to lay each one out, give you the best case for it, and be honest about where it breaks down, and then I'll tell you where I land. The first theory: somebody in the 15th century took a real language, Latin, Italian, something else, and enciphered it using a method we haven't been able to reverse engineer. The strongest version of this theory comes from a 2025 paper proposing something called a Enigma cipher. It's a substitution method that was historically plausible for the period. When applied to Latin or Italian, it reproduces many of Voynich's weird statistical properties. Now, the strength in this theory is that it explains why the text behaves like a language, and it uses period-appropriate technology. But the weakness: nobody has actually produced a verified plain text. It's a proof of concept, not a solution. It's like proving that a certain type of key could theoretically fit a particular lock without actually turning it. The second theory, and this was William Friedman's suspicion: the manuscript isn't written in a cipher at all. It's written in a deliberately invented language. The idea is that someone in the 1400s sat down and invented their own writing system from scratch, not encoding an existing language, but building an entirely new one. And this actually explains a lot. It accounts for the language-like statistics at the word level and the weirdly low entropy at the character level. Because in a constructed language, you would expect the characters to be more systematic and predictable. But the problem is this: it requires someone in the 1400s who was fluent enough in their own invented system to write 170,000 characters without visible revisions, no corrections, no false starts, no crossed out words. That's a big ask. Now, the third theory: the whole thing is meaningless. Someone faked it. The leading hoax theory comes from Gordon Rugg. He showed in 2003 that you could produce text with Voynich-like properties using a cardan grill. It's a card with holes punched in it, laid over a table of syllables. And the suspected hoaxer? Edward Cayley, a known con man who worked with John Dee in Bohemia. Now, the problem here: the cardan grill was first published in 1550, more than a century after the Voynich parchment was made. And the hoax theory has to explain the topic cluster vocabulary, the consistency across 5 different handwriting styles, and the apparent internal cross-references between sections, and of course, the sheer expense. 15 calfskins worth of parchment is not cheap. And here's the thing about the hoax theory: it requires the hoaxer to have been incredibly sophisticated enough that 600 years later we still can't prove it's a hoax. And at some point that starts sounding more implausible than the mystery itself. Now, the fourth theory, this is the one that's hardest to argue with and the hardest to accept. What if the key is just gone? If the underlying language died out, if the cipher key was personal and never written down, if the scribes took it to their graves, then the information needed to read this book may no longer exist anywhere on Earth. In that case, the Voynich isn't a puzzle waiting for someone clever enough. It's a closed system. It's a message sealed in the 15th century that may stay sealed forever. So after all of this, after lots of research, hundreds of pages of academic papers, and probably more late nights than I would like to admit, why can't I let this one go? Why can't anyone? I think there's 3 reasons. First, it's real. It's not a legend. It's calfskin, ink, and paint. You can view every page right now for free on Yale's website. Secondly, it looks like it should be readable. It has all the architecture of a real book. Sections, paragraphs, captions, recipes. Your brain sees a book and expects to be able to read it. That mismatch creates an itch that you just can't scratch. And third, it's proven to be old. Carbon dating eliminates the easy modern hoax exit. Whatever this thing is, someone in the 15th century did it deliberately, expensively, and at great length. They meant it. We just don't know what they meant. If you're asking me, and this is just where the evidence takes me personally, I think that it's most likely a real text enciphered in a way that we haven't cracked yet. The language-like properties are too strong and too consistent for a hoax. And the invented language theory requires a 15th century genius who wrote 170,000 characters flawlessly in a system they built from nothing. A cipher we can't break? It's a cipher we can't break yet. But I'll be honest, Theory 4 haunts me. Because if the key is gone, then no amount of cleverness will ever be enough. And that might be the most unsettling possibility of all. Thanks for watching. This is going to be the first of many deep dives on this channel. Some will be about conspiracies that turned out to be true. Some will be about mysteries that stay unsolved. Some will be about theories that are probably nonsense, but interesting nonsense. What they'll all have in common is this. I'm going to do the actual research, I'll show you the evidence, lay out the arguments, and be honest about what we know and what we don't. No agendas, no wake up sheeple energy, just a genuine curiosity and willingness to go down the rabbit hole. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.